So welcome everyone to another In the Conversation with, today with Andy George, the President of the United Kingdom Black Police Association. I'm Brendan from Bluelight, and this is just another in a series of interesting conversations with people who've got interesting things to say in the police sector. So welcome Andy to this chat about, well, we've had just talk before about all sorts of different issues. We're going to talk about the Black Police Association, what is it and why do we need it? The elephant in the room that spurred on our initial conversation around diversity, equality and inclusion in the police service of Northern Ireland. What is diversity, equality and inclusion and why is it so important? Some issues around recruitment and also about representation. Why is it so important that we have a representative police force? So welcome to you, Andy, and welcome to everyone who's joining us. Just have a look at the attendees now. There's some familiar names there. So welcome to Richard and Renata and to Phil and to Jessica, Rob. Oh, the list is growing. The list is growing. So welcome, Andy. Probably best if you just introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about who you are and why you're the president of the Black Police Association and why have we actually got a Black Police Association?
Yeah, hi Brendan, how you doing? Well, this is start from the start. I suppose my name's Andy George, currently an inspector in the police service of Northern Ireland, and I've been a police officer for coming on 22 years. I joined at a time of really great change, I suppose, in Northern Ireland. I was the second last RUC squad. Within 2 years of me joining, kind of went through that name change, uniform change, and we also were the only force to have positive discrimination. So I did get to live through a lot of the issues that we're going to talk through today. So really good to be here. But in relation to the MBPA, I suppose I was kind of myself, I was a latecomer to the Black Police Association. Being in Northern Ireland, I was one of about 5 or 10 officers from an ethnic minority that joined policing, out of about 13,500 officers at the time. There's now 41 officers from varying ethnic backgrounds out of 7,000, so still relatively isolated. And for me, that's a key bit about why the MBPA exists at this minute in time. 7.4% or thereabouts of officers in England and Wales are from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds. When you're isolated in the workforce, you not only go through the daily stressors that all police officers do, increased demand, all of our diminishing resources around people and around cash and budgets, we also then have a number of other issues that we go through as well. So, I mean, like that's, growing up, I would have been racially abused. I think the first time I ever was racially abused was when I was 6 years old. So that sometimes then carries into policing as well. And I have had some derogatory terms used for myself at different times. As I said, when I was by myself, that was quite difficult to deal with. It really made me, I suppose, distance myself from my ethnicity and my ethnic background at the early stages. I was only 20 years whenever I come into policing. For me, then I had a number of issues in force. And that then led me towards our Ethnic Minority Police Association and PSNI. So I joined that and then moved across into the MBPA and become president about a year ago. Again, I represent around about 4,000 to 5,000 members across 50 different police forces and law enforcement agencies. The main reason we exist is because our representation is so low within policing, particularly at the upper echelons and those in senior leadership positions. So again, I always bring it back to the national decision-making model. And the first stage of that is gather information intelligence from a variety of sources to check its veracity and make sure that we're not looking at things through a single and narrow viewpoint. I think for me, because we don't have that representation, we need a Black Police Association to kind of artificially create those voices at those senior levels. So my local chairs, myself and the cabinet will be sitting, having those really powerful and truthful conversations with people from majority white backgrounds and trying to make them see what the community's saying. And we very much sit between the community and the police. So we are police officers, but we're also community members. And for me, our members really sit there to try and bridge a gap between the two. And that's from both sides, to let police officers see the best in the community and the community see the best in policing.
Interesting, thank you. And actually that leads on to something that we were going to talk about that I kind of had at the end of the questions about representation. So the representation at the moment, you said 7.4%. I know that's nowhere near what the population, Black Asian minority population is in the United Kingdom. But why is it so important? You know, why, I see this on Twitter sometimes. People just say, well, you know, if people who are black don't want to apply, that's their business. Why should we try and force them? And why is it so important? I don't care what colour the police officer is who attends. I just care that they're professional and they can do their job. So I'm sure you've seen those sort of comments. Your thoughts on that, Andy?
No, completely. For me, representation is not only needed, it's necessary, it's vital. It's what makes us better at what we do. You know, all of the representation pieces, it's about us, you know, if we're not recruiting enough from a black community, for me, recruitment is a byproduct of good or bad relationships. So it has wider implications around how that community views us in general. The black community is one that's often spoke about most of the time. And as you said, 7.4%. You go up in the superintendent level, it's 4%. Chief officer level, probably 1% or less. So we don't have that representation. And like I just said, for me, it's about making sure that we either listen to and understand the communities that we police. You know, so many of our crime trends that are coming through, you know, modern slavery, human trafficking, you know, you look at the Essex lorry deaths, you know, that had a footprint in PSNI. So it did in Northern Ireland. And we didn't have the relationships that we needed to have and should have with our community. So the community knew what was going on, and the community knew where those people were going, but they didn't have the relationships or trust with us. Not only to not join the police service as an officer or a staff member, but also even to tell us what was happening and to protect those that are probably the most vulnerable in our society. So for me, if the police force represents a single part of the community and isn't representative of the communities we serve, then that means that we're not really able to either understand the community, align our resources to meet the needs, and they understand what those needs actually are. You know, language is only one part of it, but culture, everything else, you know, if we only do a one size fits all, we're missing out on so many other opportunities to really bring the communities and all communities closer to policing.
Right, thanks, Andy. And in that respect then, I know a lot of forces will say that they actually do find it difficult to recruit people from a variety of different backgrounds. And I wonder what your thoughts are on some of the recruitment stats that come through, that get published. So if we look at the Day One Assessment Centre prior to COVID, I don't know the exact figures, I might be 1 or 2 percentage points off, but I think it was about 81% of white British candidates passed. And I think it was about 44% of black candidates passed. Now, I know things have improved with the online assessment centre, but then again, a lot of that is automated. And the overall figure for the adverse impact ratio for Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, please forgive me for using that phrase, people who are watching this, but I can't think of any other phrase at this moment in time, and it's the one that the College of Policing use, but it is now nudged just above 0.80, which is the sort of point where we think actually is discrimination occurring. But if we just look at the adverse impact ratio for black officers, it's still below 0.80. What's going on there, Andy?
I think a lot of it, there's two kind of parts probably. I think one is around who devises the actual tests and who actually takes part in them. So is it the pool of assessors, the ones that are devising the actual online tests, are they diverse? Do they understand the different communities, and are they able to make sure that we're taking into account the different needs again? And I can't stress that enough. I will go over it a few times. I think the other bit as well is those relationships with policing in general. And as I said, being from a majority community in Northern Ireland, from a community background viewpoint, you know, I grew up in stories of policing. I knew what it was. I spoke to friends and family that were police officers, knew what was happening. As I was able to go through each assessment part, I was able to tap into those resources and almost be mentored. So I was going into that with an advantage over somebody that didn't have that. Our Black, Asian, minority, ethnic officers, staff members that are coming up into the recruitment part, they don't have that, which is why there's so much work being done around positive action. So you split the whole bit around recruitment into attraction first and then recruitment. You know, we're not attracting that diverse pool of candidates because, one, we're not reaching out. You know, I think that the big thing with the uplift, and there's a lot of advantages to it, and again, we'll chat about that later, but I think the biggest thing that we've missed is linking that to a longer term engagement strategy, and one that targets different sections of the community. We have done it nationally a bit, but I think what we need to do is understand the disadvantages that some people have. This isn't always a level playing field. You know, 30 to 40%, I think, of recruits that have been taken on by policing in the first year of uplift have a touch into policing, either second, third generation police officers, or they've friends, family, or somebody in their social circle that's connected to policing. That's 30 to 40% that have been able to tap into the same resources I chat about. So again, it's just about making sure that policing is seen as one, a viable protector of certain communities and a viable career of choice for some of these communities as well. And again, the policing is effectively outreaching to those communities. But for me, it's making sure that the recruitment process in general is free from bias, has a number of different perspectives and different people from different cultures and backgrounds that are assessing and helping develop these processes.
So still work to be done there.
Definitely still work to be done. And I think that's kind of key across the board. I think tapping into people with lived experience and making sure that the diversity of not just the police service, but those in background roles as well are kind of as diverse as they can be as well.
And I think you raised an interesting point there about those close social ties. I know I'm going to name drop now, Gareth Stubbs on Twitter. What's his handle on Twitter? @Dedicated Peeler. Shout out to Gareth. Did some research on close social ties a few years ago, and I think he found that in a year's worth of intake in Lancashire, something like 92% of all the successful candidates had a close social tie already in the police. So in effect, what they were doing is recruiting more people like us because of that strong social tie. So positive action does a lot to try and address that. But I sometimes wonder whether in forces, there might be a feeling that, yes, we've ticked that box now, we've got a positive action team. Your views on whether achieving that representation is the role of the positive action team, or is there a place for every officer and member of staff in the force to have that as part of their responsibility?
No, I think it's definitely everybody's responsibility. One of the forces I'll go to for best practice is Nottinghamshire. Constabulary, they have went from around about 3.5% to around 7%. So really made great strides, probably the best force for making their workforce more representative of the communities they serve. Obviously still work to be done, but there was three things, if I'm honest, I took out of what they were doing. First one was that strong leadership position. So Craig Guilford, the Chief Constable there, he identified the need to be more representative even before he was being told to do it for uplift. So that strong leadership, the identification of the need, the understanding of it, and then empowering those in force to actually start buying into it was kind of key. The second bit for me was utilising those with that lived experience and cultural competence. He ended up putting a superintendent, Sub Firma, who's a really good guy, understands the issues, quite passionate about getting things right. And again, because he's from that background, it's not a 9 to 5 for him. He wants to go above and beyond because it impacts his family, it impacts his friends and his community in general. So he's going to, the discretionary effort he's going to put in is far above anybody else that's kind of just doing it just to tick a box and move on. He also understood the issues, so he was able to kind of put structures and processes in place to kind of, I suppose, break down the barriers and get really into the communities at a really intricate knowledge and meaningful kind of way. And I think the last bit that they done really well was have a strong community focus. And I think if we have those three things in everything we do, that's where we're going to have a better outcome. But that strong community focus, you know, they had community members coming in people's lunch break and they were able to chat to the police officers. Police officers, which this is the bit where I'm not maybe 100% sold on, but they were then starting to ask people that they come into contact with from minority ethnic backgrounds for their details, and then they would put them on a database and they would put stuff out to them, you know, for different recruitment campaigns that were coming up. But I think having that strong community focus, having officers understanding that community focus at all levels of the organisation is really key to getting things right. But those three things for me are key drivers in anything we do.
Yeah, thank you. And a big shout out to Nottinghamshire, because I think they've done some good work there. And Sukesh Verma, shout out to him as well. He's not in that role now, but he's still passionate about it.
Yes,
and
he is.
So he's still putting that discretionary effort in.
Completely.
And you know, one of the things we've got there is we've got a superintendent who's driving the bus.
Completely.
You know, I hear the frustrations of some officers who are in positive action teams who are constables and sergeants, and with the best will in the world at that rank, there's some things that just can't change, and there's some doors that just can't push open. So you know, I kind of like the fact that they've got a senior leader there who's making this happen. So yeah, so if you're looking for a sense of direction there, and you're in a force that's struggling, give Sukesh Verma a shout. I'm sure he'd be quite happy to talk to you. Leading on from that, then we've got the sort of these three phrases that I think confuse people: diversity, equality, in inclusion. So if you were preparing for joining the police and you're trying to get your head around a lot of these issues, because you might be asked to do a presentation or you might be asked a question about this on your interview, not so much so you can deliver a great answer at your interview, but so that you can really have a good, deep understanding of these three issues, or are they so interconnected that they're not three issues, they're just one issue? How would you describe those diversity, equality and inclusion then to someone who's just at the start of their journey thinking about joining the police?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think they are separate, and I do think they kind of almost build on each other as well. So they're interconnected, but they are different. For me, the equality piece is always more or less around that legislative framework. It's about what we should do, you know, the equality duty to actually make sure that everybody has a fair and open chance at achieving and being their best. For me, diversity is more about getting our numbers right and about making sure that we're hitting certain targets and things like that. And inclusion is that bit where you can be your true self. So diversity might have the numbers, but those people may not be fully engaged. They may be discriminated against. Whereas inclusion is about the fact that people actually tap into and understand and want them to be part of the wider policing family as well. I think it was best explained to me where diversity is really more like being asked to the party, and inclusion's being asked to dance. So it's a difference. You can be there, you can maybe not be fully included, but whenever you're actually being asked to dance and you're up there, that's where you're now being as engaged as anybody else. So I think the three overlap and interlink. I think if I was to chat about them in a presentation, what I would certainly be doing about the fact that we need to certainly hit our equality duty, which is the minimum framework. Our diversity and our numbers and facts and figures is important to check our data and to look at where we're going. But I think the real bit that we want to move to is that inclusive framework. And I think diversity, equality, inclusion is always seen really as an internal HR issue. For me, what we need to do is understand that it's actually an operational necessity, and it's something that makes us better at what we do as an organization. And it's all of the stuff that we've chatted about before. But for me, that's the three differences, and that's where I would kind of probably look at them if I was going to chat about it.
Yeah, and I kind of like that analogy as well. I've used it myself, and sometimes to say that actually you don't have to dance if you don't want to.
I can't, so it's probably best to don't.
Just to do the dad dancing.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, but just, you know, being able to be your true authentic self, and what that brings to the service in terms of its value, I think is enormous. So I think in terms of inclusion, I think a lot of the time people think, oh, it's about people of colour or people of different religions, but I think it's more than that. I don't know, that inclusion part, your thoughts on whether it is actually more than just the colour of your skin or your religion or what country.
Oh, no, completely, you know, and that's intersectionality and those differences across the board. You know, socioeconomic factors have a big input into this as well. I think it's about your lived experiences in general and everything that you bring to the community, you know, bring the policing in general. That's key for me. And again, so the best way to look at diversity and inclusion at times as well. Diversity is that picture on the board, which looks great. And inclusion is having that service that actually values everybody. Again, that's one difference which probably frustrates our members quite a bit, because it's almost that tokenism where we'll try and portray this really inclusive environment. But whenever it comes to it, then you can't be your true authentic self whenever you come to work. You know, you have to suppress a lot of what you're doing. You have to assimilate, and you have to really become part of the culture that is policing in general.
Mm-hmm. Interesting stuff, and that leads, it's a perfect segue really to the reason why I got in touch with you originally, which is I call it the elephant in the room, and if I can still call it that. So at this moment in time, I'm supporting and helping a group of officers from the Police Service of Northern Ireland who are looking to get promoted to Sergeant and Inspector. And one of the questions they're wrestling with, and I think it's a fair question that should be asked of anyone in any force, not just in Northern Ireland, is how will you, as a leader, ensure that diversity, equality and inclusion is a key part of the way you lead your team? Or even if it's just, you know, how will you integrate diversity into what you do, or any question like that? And the answers that people have been giving, quite honestly, they're a bit like wish lists. You know, I'm going to talk to everyone, you know, and find out what their needs are. I'm going to ensure that my language reflects the language that's expected, and I'm going to make sure that everyone's needs are accommodated. And it's just a lovely wish list. And neurodiversity is mentioned, and people who are black gets mentioned, and you know, everything except the Loyalist, Nationalist, Roman Catholic, Protestant issue. And whenever I ask that question and say, well, how will you address that issue? There's like silence, and it's as if the officers don't even want to go there. One of them even said, I'm in danger of being papered if I ask people or talk to people about their religion or their nationalist or loyalist beliefs. And I'm not quite sure whether Simon Byrne, the Chief Constable, or the people of Northern Ireland would actually want police officers to be afraid of discussing these issues on their team to ensure that, like we said before, that it's truly inclusive. So I welcome your thoughts there, Andy. And actually, not speaking to me, you're speaking to maybe hundreds of your fellow colleagues in Northern Ireland who are and they are, you know, their heart's in it, but they're wrestling with, there's something there they're wrestling with. And I'm not quite sure if I understand it, which is why I originally reached out to you.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, let's be honest, Northern Ireland is, you know, it's a completely different environment than any other policing environment in the Great Britain, Northern Ireland, United Kingdom, whichever way you want to speak about it. And again, in Northern Ireland, we have to be really clued in and sensitive to the community needs, because the consequences for us isn't just bad PR, you know, it's potentially public disorder, you know, there could be attacks on officers if we get it wrong. So the consequences are so much higher, but that doesn't mean that that isn't across the board in policing in general. We're probably just at the extreme, and things that happen in Northern Ireland are amplified. Whenever we had the changes, whenever I joined policing, I was one of the 92% from a Protestant background. Again, you wouldn't often chat about that, but I don't think it should be anything that's wrong in chatting about it. You know, for me, I can empathise and I can understand, you know, the different cultures and communities within Northern Ireland, having grew up here, and some of our newer communities that have come in. Whenever the PSNI come in its inception, there was a neutral working environment. You know, at that time, I think there was pictures of the Queen, there was flags and different things, and they all have certain symbolisms within Northern Ireland. And because the issues, you know, we've lost so many people due to these issues, that the issues are more traumatic, they're more emotional, and there's a lot more kind of heartfelt emotions attached to a lot of these different things that are going on, which are really hard to explain to somebody outside of Northern Ireland. But part of that neutral working environment was that we just didn't talk about things, you know, and that was probably brought in because of the environment we moved in. You know, 98, we had the real Good Friday Agreement, the peace deal, and I think it was probably needed at the time because we were bringing a lot of people in with different views about a really emotive subject and the troubles and all of the different perspectives and sides of that argument. For me now, we're 20 years on from that. I think there's still issues in Northern Ireland, but we shouldn't be afraid to chat about it. And again, it's like chatting to a Muslim officer or somebody that looks like me. It's how you go about having those conversations. I'm not going to move straight in and ask somebody what they think about whether Northern Ireland should be united to the Republic of Ireland, whether it should be part of the Union. That's a debate which I'm never really going to get into. But what I can do is just ask people what their barriers were to coming in, what their different perspectives are, and how they view the world in general. And as I said, I think for me, coming from a Protestant background, the biggest diversity inclusion lecture or lesson that I learned was spending 10 hours with somebody with a different background. And over years and years of sharing experiences, and those experiences where we're dealing with traumatic incidents together and we're supporting each other. But then in our downtime, also discussing what it was like for me growing up, what it was like for him or her, and then sharing those experiences, I think, are really where we need to go to move on. I think the PSNI is hitting a point where we are having this big kind of internal struggle about whether we should talk about these more openly or not. My own view is that we should. I think for somebody going for a sergeant or inspector's board, I think that it needs to be, you know, just said that you're not afraid to have these conversations. It's how far down the avenue you go and how you broach it. You know, if I just speak to a Muslim officer, I'm not going to go straight in and say, what's it like being a Muslim officer, you know, and you're not going to go into those really topical, you know, what's that halal stuff all about? You know, that's not going to end up engendering anybody to open up and tell you. It's about learning from other people's perspectives. So I don't think that you should shy away from that debate, but it's how you go about it, you know, and it's just, you know, you don't have to ask somebody what their cultural background or their community background is, but, you know, they may volunteer that. And if you do, then you might explore just, you know, so what's it like for you growing up? You know, does your child have to go through communion? You know, what are your views around this? And that for me is getting to know your team, and that then allows you to kind of understand them better, to help them be their best, and then, you know, to nurture and grow them in line with everybody else. Because again, all of the things we do as sergeants, inspectors, and leaders in policing, it's about not having that one size fits all. It's about making sure that we are responsive to everybody in our team, that we understand that each team member has their own particular issues, their own barriers, their own baggage that they come into policing with. And we have to be able to understand that. Otherwise, we will be asking them to do certain things which maybe they're not comfortable doing. So we just need to understand that. But definitely don't shy away from it. And just, it's how you do it rather than what you do.
Interesting that. And I think I've just done a little piece with them about having natural and authentic conversations. So what I've asked them to think of is, think about, if you're in an acting position at the moment, or you're in a temporary inspector at the moment, think about your team and think about the one that you know most about in terms of their family, what they like to do, where they like to go on holiday, what they worry about, what motivated them to join the police, what inspires them, what do they want to do, what do they want to achieve. You know, all those perfectly natural questions that you'd ask someone as a leader, because it's your responsibility to get to know your team. And then compare that to the person who you know least about, and then reflect on it and think, why is there that gap? Am I naturally leaning, even on an unconscious level, towards people who are like me? Am I potentially having conversations with people who are more like me? But I'm not doing it because I'm a bad person. I'm not doing it because I'm racist or sexist. I'm just doing it because I've got an unconscious bias, and recognizing that within yourself, and then thinking about, well, what steps can I now take to have that same conversation with the rest of my staff, so that they too can start sharing those things with me. So I get to know them as well as I get to know that other person. And at some point they may say something like, well, actually Easter's really important because all of my family get together and we all go to church and we go to mass, and actually I've got and then may come in 6 months' time, actually my little boy's got his Holy Communion coming up. And they trust you enough to be able to have that conversation with you, you know, to be able to say, is there any chance I can get that day off? Because it's really important to me.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to encourage with them, because even then there's sort of, I'm not sure if there seems to be some reluctance. And I don't know whether it's similar to some of the conversations I had with Sergeant Julie Frank, bless her soul. She passed away now, pioneer for LGBT issues in GMP 2 decades ago. And your friend of mine, Charlie Critchlow, similar conversations 20 years ago. Tough conversations to have about Black officers, LGBT officers 20 years ago, but now easier conversations to have. Is it going to take 20 years in Northern Ireland, or what can we do to accelerate it? And is there a place for sergeants and inspectors to accelerate that progress?
I think there definitely is. You know, the race issue is something that's coming into Northern Ireland as well, and I think that kind of really offers risks to policing in Northern Ireland, but it also represents opportunities. Mm-hmm. You know, for me, neither community at this minute in time wants to be seen as racist or involved in that discrimination. You know, so I think there's a bit around communities in general that we can kind of pull together. You know, we often understand and know our communities from Protestant and Catholic backgrounds, but we don't often understand our other communities and those those underrepresented communities from ethnic backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And again, LGBT communities and others as well, disabled officers and staff members. You know, for me, it's about us maybe just having those conversations in general. I think there's a leadership issue as well, and I think it needs to come from the top. I don't think it's really in a position for sergeants and inspectors to initiate that subject, and I think that's probably where the reluctance has come, because there has been a disconnect between senior leadership and kind of the front line in PSNI for a while, and I think that's the bit that needs to come from the top. And we have just set up a number of different groups. The Being Representative Inclusion Group is one that's really got all the staff associations involved, including the Catholic Officer Guild as well, and we're pushing that out to try and make sure that all views are kind of there, that people are understanding the difference that makes us probably the better service that we are to all communities. So I can see the reluctance, I understand it. But again, I think, as you said, I think it's small steps, those conversations that we can have, not so much about religion and about community background, but just about the different needs of each member of your team. You know, that's what you need to break down into, as you said, then that will come up in people looking time off and the pressures that they're under, maybe in their own social circumstance. So as you said, if you don't do that with the rest of the team, then you are going to end up naturally leaving yourself open to that almost exclusion and discrimination piece potentially, because you're not putting yourself out there. And again, leadership's a responsibility. You know, it's not just about the higher pay bracket and the bigger pension. Mm-hmm. It's all about you being in a position of responsibility and you having a responsibility to the rest of your team. And that means every single member. You know, so I think that's a big responsibility for anybody to take on, and it's one that people shouldn't take on lightly. If they're afraid to have those conversations, then, you know, they really do have to sometimes look at where they are in leadership roles in general.
I suppose that's getting everyone to the position where they're comfortable enough to say to their sergeant or inspector, I'd like to dance and I'd like to dance this way. Completely. Going back to that inclusion piece.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So a lot for, I think, some of your colleagues to think about there in Northern Ireland. And I wonder whether there'd be I wonder whether some of them might be reluctant actually to approach some of those new associations that you've mentioned. I don't know, or whether they would be received. If I was an officer in Northern Ireland, hoping to get promoted to sergeant, would I be okay contacting some of those associations, even though I wasn't necessarily Catholic or Black or LGBT, just to have a conversation, just to help me understand the emerging issues or the issues, the elephants in the room, if you like, in Northern Ireland? Would that be something?
I think it's essential. I think it's essential across the board. You know, and I do mentor a number of people, and it's something I say to them all. I says, you know, if we only look at things through our own perspectives, our own perceptions, then we're inclined to make poor decisions. You know, I speak about the national decision-making model all the time. Mm-hmm. You know, that first part around gather information intelligence from a variety of sources. If we do not do that, we're always prone to making decisions that work to the detriment of some section of the community. For me, this is where if you speak to the Ethnic Minority Police Association, the LGBT network, that's going to expand your knowledge. It's going to make you a better police officer, and it's going to make you understand whenever a call comes up like that. And this is where we have to upskill ourselves in our downtime. There's no point in trying to get onto the phone to somebody at 3 a.m. saying that you've just dealt with a race hate incident or another incident involving the LGBT community and trying to upskill yourself then. Upskill yourself in that downtime. And certainly working with staff associations, the staff associations are more than happy to have those conversations with you, and they'll almost be like you can't get away from them because they want to chat about what they're doing and the difference that their association are actually going to make to policing.
Good, and I hope that's given some of the individuals who I'm working with some ideas, as opposed to a wish list, because, you know, I think if you give that wish list answer, you're going to have an assessor doing exactly what you've just done there, shaking their head and thinking, that is not what I'm looking for in a leader for the future.
No, completely. It's all about what I'm going to do. It's, you know, and that's the whole bit with any promotion process. It's about, I will do this. And it's not about, as you said, I know some people in the past have just learned, you know, the professional policing framework or the CVF, you know, and that's not what people are looking. They're looking to know your understanding of it. They're looking to know that you not only can recite it, but you actually can live and breathe. So if you're chatting about deliver, support, inspire, you know, it's all about what you can do to your team. And it's about taking out key themes, like, you know, understanding that your team need motivated, that they need certain skills, resources, and you have a responsibility to try and help them, you know, and that could be how helping them or letting them do a briefing on your behalf, letting them research a specific topic and then give a briefing to the rest of the team, you know, bringing in some issues. So for me, it's always keep it small, look at gaps that are there, you know. I mean, like, it's one of the people that I know that was going for it a number of years ago, you know, there's issues around our telecommunications liaison unit and around the filling out of forms and different bits on what we needed. And they actually brought one of the O2 gurus in to some of the other teams, and they were able to upskill them around some of the issues that were going on. So it's small things like that you can do every day that not only give you board gold like everybody chats, but they can actually make the team better at what they do. I don't think that we should just do things for the sake of it. I think if we look at anything that's happening in your team, there's small things that you can do to actually make a real difference to not only the police officers out delivering those services, but also those victims and those communities that kind of we're working with to try to tackle that harm.
I suppose there's something there about the power of connections within the service. Who are you connected with? Are you connected with people like yourself? Or have you got good connections with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, so that as a leader, you could just pick up the phone and say, hey, Andy, do you remember that conversation we had 6 months ago where we talked about such and such an issue occurring? Do you know, it's just occurred, and I'm just going to bounce a few ideas off you, as opposed to, like you say, at 3 o'clock in the morning thinking, quick, too late, too late to upskill yourself.
Completely, as you said, I literally got an email just asking for something like that today. I got a phone call last week, somebody asking me just, obviously from the national kind of viewpoint on what we're bringing back to Northern Ireland as well. And I think that's a good bit about being president, being from Northern Ireland. We went through so many changes in Northern Ireland for certain reasons. And I think taking the lessons we've learned out of Northern Ireland, putting it back into England and Wales, and then also taking some of the stuff we've done for race and bringing it back to Northern Ireland, I think really gives an opportunity to make both services better in general.
Yeah, awesome. Andy, I really appreciate that conversation. I'd love to continue it for longer, but I did say we'd be within 45 minutes. I can talk about this. It's so interesting. I could talk about this for hours. I'm sure you could, but you've probably got dinner to go to and everyone's got things to do. And so I'll just read some of the comments if I can. Perhaps end with that if that's at all possible. So Krishna is saying, this question was on my sergeant's board a fortnight ago. It's part of our Chief Constable's delivery plan. I think there's something there about, are we preparing ourselves for a more diverse, equal and inclusive and representative police service because we think it's the right thing to do, or because it's in the Chief's delivery plan, or because it's going to get me my pips? And I think there's something for everyone to think about there in terms of what's your motivation. Phil is asking a question. Talking about religion within PSNI can provoke many emotions or memories. I've similar service to that of Andy, and back then we used to say there are 3 religions in Northern Ireland: Protestant, Catholic and police. Times have changed, but inclusion and equality of diverse backgrounds can only be good to the service and communities. So not a question there from Phil, but just a comment. Thank you, Phil. Is there anything there, Andy, that you want to comment on?
No, I'd agree. And you said, that's why, as I said, that there's so much trauma and emotion linked to a lot of these issues. But we don't have to get into the really sticky kind of topics that we have there around, some of the issues that comes up all the time around legacy, around flags, stuff like that. That's the conversation we don't need to initiate. But what we need to do is understand the different needs of each member of your team. And again, we can only do that by having those conversations and by asking questions. And it's something I didn't shy away from, on different conversations with people. And I would actually seek out somebody that's from a different background just so that I could upskill myself and make myself better.
Yeah. So there's a challenge for you all, officers of Northern Ireland, and actually officers who want to lead and inspire across the United Kingdom who are watching this. I'm going to throw a challenge down for you there. Over the next 24 hours, go and have an authentic conversation with someone on your team that you don't know as well, the one that you know the least. That's my challenge for you, folks. And I'd love to hear how it went. Even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes, and you learn one new thing about that person. That is something quite powerful, I think. Richard's saying, love the way you've both described the need for authenticity in candidates. Yeah, curiosity is key. Great conversation. Thank you, Richard. And Krishna is saying the disconnect is very real and a worry that needs to be spoken about even more. And has also said, challenge accepted.
There you go.
Thank you, Krishna. I think that's possibly a good place to end. Good place to end our conversation. Unless there's anything that you want to wrap up with, Andy?
No, I'm happy enough. Great speaking to you, and again, the opportunity just to chat with everybody else, the questions that are coming in. So thanks for the opportunity, and look forward to seeing everybody's results and the results of that challenge in particular.
Yeah, that's it just came to me there. The challenge. I'll just repeat in case anyone missed it. Your challenge based on all of this conversation with Andy, which I've so appreciated. Thank you, Andy. For all of you watching this on the replay, on YouTube, on Facebook, or listening to it on podcast, the challenge is go and find someone on your team. If you're a constable, and even if you're not looking to get promoted, find the person on your team that you know the least and have an authentic conversation with them where you get to learn something about them that's new. And I think if that happened over the next 24 hours across the United Kingdom, I don't know what changes that could provoke. Let's see. So thank you once again, Andy, and thank you to all of you who have joined us live tonight. We're getting thanks coming in from Eileen, from Krishna, thanks from Crackney. Andy, I need to have a conversation with you to find out what Crackney is one day. So Ahmed is saying thanks from West Yorkshire. Charles is saying thanks from London. Thank you to everyone for tuning in today, for listening and watching this. And Andy, I look forward to bumping into you in person one day. where
Yeah, completely.
continue this conversation.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Brendan.
Take care.
All
Goodbye.
the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.